Okay, here we are with a couple cutaways, and I want to talk to you a little bit just about rocker arm ratio and volumetric efficiency. So what we're talking about here, we're not talking about volumetric displacement. When we counted volumetric displacement, we were looking at what is the maximum space here of how much we can bring in. But that doesn't mean that would be that would assume, those calculations would assume 100% volumetric efficiency. That doesn't always happen on an intake stroke, right? So if we only have the throttle partly opened and we're coming down, we're only maybe bringing in like this much of this much, right? So we have lower amounts of air fuel ratio, we have less bang, and then we get all our varying speeds of RPM, okay? But in a high demand situation for power, when we want high RPMs, we want to try and fill this space up as best as we can. So we're still talking naturally aspirated here, where the piston's movement down is what's drawing in that air and fuel, okay? So if we think about volumetric efficiency, and I can't really show you here in this video, but I always imagine, so if you take and imagine a room, like your classroom, and imagine that piston coming, that piston's going to go across your classroom. It's going to take up the whole classroom. It's going to move across. And it's going to draw in that air-fuel mixture. Okay, and if the door, we have one little door over there. If I just open that door up a little bit and close it like this, and that door is my valve, I can't get in this whole space of air. Right? But if I can open up that door a little further and a little faster in that same amount of time that piston goes, across the room, I can fill this up with a little bit more air, okay? So what are some things that improve volumetric efficiency in a naturally aspirated engine? And that's where we get to talking about high lift cams, rocker ratio, and some things like that, okay? So imagine that door just going like this a little bit versus like this, okay? The second one obviously is going to let in more air and fuel. So rocker arm ratio, what that's talking about here is for every inch that this side comes up here, how far down does this go? Now this one looks pretty close to centered, and it might even be a 1-to-1 ratio, but you might get like a 1.4. So the little lobe on the cam that pushes up on the lifter, that pushes up on this push rod, which hinges this, that lobe might have a lift of, let's just say 1 inch, okay? So just to make the math easy. So let's say it comes up 1 inch, this would actually go down 1.4. So this valve would open 1.4 inches down here. That's like that door coming like this instead of like this, right? So it opens further in the same amount of time, less restriction, more air fuel can get in here, improving that volumetric efficiency. Okay, that's where we get into high lift cams, right? So if we get a cam with a lobe that's a little higher, it can lift that valve further and faster in the same amount of time. So it opens faster, stays open for longer at full open, and slams shut, versus sort of a really low round lobe, if you can imagine, would just kind of do this, right? Versus bam, bam, right? So it's all a balance of, obviously a perfect square would be like slam it open, keep it open full for a long time, and slam it shut. But a perfect square is not going to wear very well, right? So we have to find that balance point of, well, if we go too high, we're going to wear off the nodule on the tip of the lobe, right? And then they're all going to be uneven, and the thing's not going to run right for how it's set up. Versus, well, if we go too smooth, like a perfect circle would be the best for wear, but it's not going to open anything. So we got to find that balance point. Like, what is it that we want, and then what's the longevity? Okay, is this something that we're going to be putting a cam in every 10 races and it's a race car, or it comes apart after every single race and gets a new cam, or is this something that's going in a car for 400,000 kilometers? Okay, so those are the balances that we play to improve volumetric efficiency. Now we could also take and talk a little bit here about naturally aspirated versus supercharged or turbocharged. So when we talk naturally aspirated, this piston moving down is the only thing that brings in this air, okay? So the only pressure that's in this space is the atmospheric pressure that it was exposed to when that valve was open, right? And we're taking and drawing that air, in this case here, through the carburetor, through in here. So atmospheric pressure is what's here, okay? Or an absence of atmospheric pressure And we create the vacuum with the piston depending on the restrictions, but atmospheric pressure is what's moving it into here. A forced air engine is when we use something to force air in here, whether it's a ram air hood or forced air induction or supercharged or turbocharger. And what we're trying to do is on that intake stroke, something's forcing and shoving that air fuel mixture in here, right? And it's actually sort of like pre-compressing it. So whatever our boost is measured at, we're sort of pre-compressing this. So not only are we at exactly 100% volumetric efficiency, we're sort of pre-compressing it. So we're already sort of doing that compression job. So when I do go to compress it, not only do I have more in there, but now I'm getting a much higher compression and a much bigger bang. Okay, now that's variant as well, depending on restriction of throttle, how much we let in, we can still reduce that amount that goes in there. And then of course our boost, right? The higher the boost, the higher the pre-pressure in the cylinder, and that's all variant independent and changing through different operating conditions. So, but that's sort of the goal, is to ram stuff in there and pre-compress it. So if you think of that classroom example again, if I have my classroom here and I've got this piston moving across the whole classroom trying to fill this space up with air and fuel, and I just open that door like this, right? Now, if I open that door and I got a bunch of fans sitting there blowing air and fuel in here, I'm gonna fill this space up a lot better. So that's sort of what that concept is. Okay, so that's sort of the differences between the two, talking a little bit about just how we move air.